The sole surviving masterpiece bequeathed to history by Titus Lucretius Carus, the renowned Roman poet of antiquity, is a monumental and extensive didactic poem that vibrates with a form of scientific reasoning that is remarkably aligned with the modern understanding of the concept. For centuries, his profound scientific sensibility and his rigorous skepticism were relegated to obscurity, effectively entering a cone of shadow during the long intellectual dormancy of the Middle Ages. However, the trajectory of intellectual history shifted dramatically in 1417, when a damaged and fragile manuscript of his poem, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, was unearthed in Italy. This serendipitous discovery allowed Lucretius to regain his rightful and prominent station within the history of science. It was, in fact, Lucretius who served as the primary vessel for reintroducing the rich infusion of Epicurean philosophy to the Europe of the Renaissance, a system of thought deeply rooted in the ancient atomism proposed by Democritus of Abdera. Through this work, Lucretius exerted a potent and undeniable influence on the mechanistic philosophers who followed, as well as on titans of science such as Isaac Newton (13) and numerous intellectual luminaries of the Enlightenment. Regarding the personal history of the man known as Titus Lucretius Carus, historical records are sparse, and nothing precise is known about the details of his life. We do know that he reached the age of maturity during the turbulent, cruel, and perilous reign of the dictator Sulla. He lived long enough to witness the meteoric political ascent of Julius Caesar, though he passed away before he could see Caesar's assassination. A succinct review of the Roman history, contemporaneous with Lucretius, as it is reflected within the verses of his work, unveils a grim societal picture. The ruling class had largely forfeited its former moral integrity, having descended into a state characterized by rampant selfishness and unchecked arrogance. Furthermore, the social fabric was tearing. A downtrodden and oppressed urban population had emerged in Rome, while lawlessness and banditry flourished in the countryside. The celebrated Roman senator Cicero, who had himself been forced into exile and subsequently dedicated his energies to literature, provided a contemporary assessment of the poet. Writing to his brother around the year 55 BC, Cicero observed that the poems of Lucretius exhibit genius as well as artistic merit, acknowledging the intellectual power contained within the verse. De Rerum Natura is formally dedicated to a politician named Memmius, a praetor who later served as the governor of Bithynia. History remembers Memmius not for his virtues, but for being a man of poor taste who was largely unworthy of the exquisite poetry Lucretius bestowed upon him. The work itself bears the unmistakable stamp of the philosophy of Epicurus, 341 to 271 BCE, the Greek thinker who was himself heavily influenced by Democritus, circa 470 to 360 BC, the original founder of Atomism. Across the span of the work's 6 books, Lucretius comprehensively addresses atomic theory and psychology, while also presenting a unified theory of the cosmos and various natural phenomena. While space does not permit a reproduction of every aspect of Lucretian thought, we will confine ourselves here to presenting and expanding upon a few of his most critical ideas. First, Lucretius posits that the world is fundamentally constituted of atoms that are in a state of permanent, ceaseless motion. This kinetic view of matter was revolutionary, suggesting that at the microscopic level, the universe is dynamic rather than static. Second, he argues that the objects we perceive, those we see with our eyes and touch with our hands, are composed of different types of atoms. However, this is not a chaotic assembly. There are laws of nature implying that only certain atomic components can exist and combine to form stable matter. Third, contrary to the idea of an eternal world, Lucretius asserts that the universe had a distinct beginning in time and will inevitably meet its end at some point in the distant future, suggesting a cosmos that is mortal just like its inhabitants. Fourth, he challenges dualism by stating that the mind and the body are not separate entities. Rather, there is only a single corporal substance. Physicality is the basis of consciousness. Fifth, following from this materialist view, the mind is born and eventually dies. Consequently, there is no life after death. The terrifying image of hell, he argues, is merely a psychological projection of the suffering and torment that humans experience here on Earth. Sixth, he offers a proto-evolutionary perspective, noting that plants and animals appeared on Earth naturally, but not all species were equipped to survive. Those that could not adapt perished. Seventh, and perhaps most famously, he declares that superstitions are derived entirely from ignorance. Fear of the gods and natural phenomena stems from a lack of understanding of the physical laws that govern the world. Lucretius appears to the contemporary reader as a strikingly modern philosopher, primarily due to a mode of thinking that is radically detached from theology. He staunchly refuses to attribute superior purposes, divine designs, or transcendent ideals to material things or events. We must not imagine, Lucretius writes with clarity, that our shining eyes were made deliberately, or that our arms represented an adaptation to our strong shoulders, or that our hands were attached as an aid, because they might be necessary to sustain life. Instead, he inverts this logic, emphasizing that the thing that is born creates the utility. Sight did not exist before the appearance of the eyes, nor speech before the creation of the tongue. This non-teleological approach, the refusal to attribute a preordained finality or design to biological structures, is a fundamental attribute of true scientific thought. Without this distinction, inquiry would effectively become dogma and would fail to advance in any meaningful way. Teleological thinking, by contrast, remains a characteristic trait of essentially every pre-scientific thought system in Europe and continues to be referenced today in the so-called science of creation. In the realm of biology, Lucretius stands as a remarkable precursor to the theories of the origin of species, natural selection, and the inheritance of specific genetic traits. He observed the patterns of heredity with keen insight. It can sometimes happen that a child has the traits of the grandparents or resembles his great-grandparents, writes Lucretius. He explains this phenomenon by suggesting that this is because their parents have latent seeds in their bodies, which are grouped in many combinations and which come from the ancestral heritage transmitted from generation to generation. These latent seeds are a striking anticipation of genes. However, it must be noted that Lucretius did not possess the full notion of the evolution of species as we understand it today. This limitation seems natural and forgivable, considering that he was not in contact, as Charles Darwin was, with an entire world of plant and animal breeders and the tangible products of their centuries of work. The Rerum Natura is a book about which it can be truthfully said that it changed the history of the world. For a long period, it was effectively lost to European civilization, vanishing until the Italian humanist Gianfrancesco Poggio Bracciolini discovered a damaged copy in a remote monastery in Germany at the beginning of the 15th century. Following this recovery, Lucretius was published and avidly studied during the Renaissance. Despite the severe accusations of atheism that were frequently brought against the author, the Catholic Church notably never banned the publication of De Rerum Natura. Its admirers multiplied significantly during the 16th century, and later the thinkers of the Enlightenment came to consider Lucretius a personality of immense prominence. His importance for the development of scientific thought could only increase after John Dalton 22 scientifically rediscovered and formalized atomic theory in the 19th century, validating the poet's ancient intuitions. Much has been written about Lucretius over the millennia, almost always in eulogistic terms, starting with the Roman poet Virgil in the 1st century AD and continuing through to Voltaire in the 18th century. In the modern era, the appreciation has not waned. In 1924, Albert Einstein, 59, paid a heartfelt homage to Lucretius's genius and his inquisitive mind in a preface to a German edition of the book. Although he is not a scientist in the modern sense of the word, writes the scholar George Hadsitz more recently, the search for the laws governing the universe and the belief in them secured Lucretius a leading place. He was a great adventurer who pursued what all scientific research aims for: liberation from the control of nature, liberation from the terrible control of ignorance, superstition, and fear. Ultimately, one can only say one more thing, without running the risk of becoming too didactic or sounding like a hagiographer. If all schoolchildren in our present day were to read and discuss the works of Lucretius, the world would undoubtedly become a better, more rational place.